Well, good evening, and thank you for watching Community Voice Channel. In tonight's episode, we're going to be going over the steampunk panels that were filmed back in June of this past summer, featuring horror romance writers. Let's take a look.
We're going to be discussing various topics related to horror writing. My name's Tim, co-hosting with Angel this year. So let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. So if you would just tell us your name, where your booth is, and what got you into horror. We'll start with Angel and then work our way down.
Hi, I'm Angel Nix. I'm actually a paranormal romance author. I'm upstairs, booth 11, kind of close to the stage.
My name is Christy Peterson Schoonover. I am here in booth 5 with the New England Horror Writers. We are an organization that represents horror writers in New England, promotes them, things like that. I'm a short story writer by trade. I specialize in horror and literary cross-genre short stories, so it's a lot of psychological thriller. I do a lot of magic realism, whatever. It's like everything. And I also edit, I founded and I do edit the short literary horror fiction magazine 34 Orchard. And so you can find out more, and I have free bookmarks, so if you are interested in any of that, come upstairs and you'll be able to find my magazine online.
I'm Jen Bernardini. I'm booth 16. It's the one right when you're leaving. So I wrote Mirror in the Attic, We All Fall Down, which is part of a trilogy. I also have an anthology with some Bram Stoker Award winners in there. I made a journal of writing prompts because one of the questions I get all the time is like, how do I write? So I have a journal of horror prompts, and I have an anthology with a bunch of people who, wrote stories from that. I do editing sometimes for whoever asks for it. That's about it.
I'm Connie Hunter. I'm a paranormal romance writer, dabbling in fantasy. I'm in the Silk Room with booth S3.
And as I said, I'm Tim McLaughlin of Table 18. My stories are paranormal, fantasy / horror. That is one interesting thing that I've noticed, though, is that when I try to list it as paranormal anything in most online spaces, it tries to categorize me as paranormal romance. Apparently, it's
Big thing.
the big thing there. It is not. It is not romance. But kind of one thing that I was kind of thinking about lately is you can kind of, I was reading a thing recently about how you can kind of trace what kind of the cultural anxiety is at the time based on what types of horror and paranormal and type of story like that are being told. Like, after World War II there was a lot of kind of this radiation thing, and then later on you had the slashers in the 70s. And presumably a lot of people are anticipating it's going to be like outbreak type stuff coming out soon. But that suggests that there's a relationship that there's a conversation happening between the culture and kind of these genres that deal with our anxieties and fears and the ways that we relate to them, perhaps romantically, perhaps as a frightening thing. What do you think these genres contribute to that conversation? What role do you think horror and paranormal and stuff plays in this cultural conversation about our anxieties?
Well, it's funny though, because one of the books that I put out is called We All Fall Down, and I wrote it before COVID was a thing, but it is about a virus. And it's a trilogy, but it obviously I wrote it before COVID, but it's like almost mirrors what happens. But I also like conspiracy theories, so I tried to throw as much in there as possible, and they can get... Yeah. There's no lizard people or anything like that, but I think for me, especially, with social media and everybody is talking about everything, it's so easy for people to be afraid of everything that when I wrote that, I tried to take all of these things that people are afraid of. Like gun control, and we're all going to be slaves, you know what I mean? Things like that, from the smallest things to like the most outrageous things. And I think, especially with horror, it's so easy to play on that, because I think a lot of us have the same fears, especially now.
Scary words.
Yeah, for me, it's really easy to see what a lot of people are saying, and a lot of it is the same stuff.
Well, and I think too, there's a very strong connection between social anxieties and horror, because it is a way that we can process things. You know, even if it's in metaphor. You look at what happened after 9/11. We had a lot of Hostel, Saw, all of that sort of stuff, which really played on our anxieties about not feeling safe in our own country when we used to be kind of isolationist.
Right.
We felt kind of safe. Like, even though there had been Pearl Harbor, that was out of a lot of people's memory by then. You know, because most of those veterans had passed on or gotten older. So as a group consciousness, it wasn't there. I think it helps us deal with it. I think it helps us process. I think when you're thinking about something like the pandemic and the virus, other than the fear of being sick, like if you think of virus on a literal level, the real thing that was happening was destabilization. There were a lot of people that could not process, oh my God, I used to go to work every day, and oh my God, now there's like nowhere for me to go. Oh my God, I can't go to my grandmother's for Christmas. Oh my God, I can't. And on the surface, these all look like silly things, but they're not silly. What that is you just took the foundation that is my life, and you took that rug and you went like that. What do I do now? And so all of these routines and the breaking of the routines, I think where horror is going to go is metaphorically, we're not necessarily going to see a lot of pandemic stuff on the surface because I think people are tired of talking about it, but I do think we're going to see stuff about destabilization. We're going to see stuff about things crumbling. I'm guessing that abandoned stuff is going to be coming up. I'm guessing we're going to hit apocalypses in maybe a slightly different way. I also think, just because of what I get in my magazines since this pandemic has been going on, we're going to get a lot more internal stuff. We're going to get a lot more like, you know, my mother's dying, my grandmother's dying, I lost my job, now I need to go and, you know, whatever, jump off a bridge or whatever it is. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So, I mean, I don't know, it'll be interesting. And I also think we're going to see another spike in ghost stories.
Right.
Because, you know, people are going to be haunted by their losses. So, but that's it.
Alright, so how would you, where would you draw the lines? Because the genres obviously cross over a lot of different genres. You know, we have paranormal romance authors here, we have ghost story authors here, we have stuff like that. What do you think kind of defines horror and or the paranormal that sets it apart from other genres?
But I think even within horror, there's so many different genres. There's so many different ways you can go, whether it's like serial killers or ghosts or monsters, vampires, whatever. And then you get, you know, the outrageous stuff. You get like the splatterpunk, the stuff that's just straight up gore. For me, there's things I don't put in there because it's just not what I like. Like, I don't really have like romance in my books at all, just because I don't do like graphic gore. I mean, you know, there's violence and that kind of thing, but there's not like, you know, just gore for gore's sake, like blood, head, guts flying all over the place, you know what I mean, stuff like that. So I think even within the horror genre itself, it goes so many ways, and there's times I see things and I'm like, what is that? And I have to look it up. Like, now it's like horror adjacent is a genre, and it's like, there's so many different things that it's hard to even just be like, it's horror. Do you know what I mean?
I read so many different paranormal romances and so many different fantasies that I couldn't finish it. Just because it started to bore me. I mean, that's a big book. That's a big book.
Yeah.
So horror has not been my thing, really. But to go back to a little bit to the, like, say, the pandemic, and how people wonder how you write things. Well, you can write anything. Anything. Including a pure romance falling in love with the COVID virus.
Yes,
It is a
someone
very
did.
popular, there's a very
I'm
popular
sure
book
Chuck Sable at
series.
least has touched on that.
There's a very popular book series. Now that's horrific in my own, in my own mind. But scientist falls in love with the COVID virus. It turns into a guy. That's kind of scary. But you know, other than that, I really, like in my third book that I'm starting now, that's gonna have a virus, and we had just passed. We're in this stage
So
And that's still scary,
right.
no matter what.
I think one of the things I was kind of trying to get at with that question was specifically for you two paranormal, is why, like, why are you calling it paranormal rather than fantasy? Like, what separates those two things? Where is there a line between them?
Generally speaking, yes.
Where is it?
In most cases, fantasy has to do with fae, fairies, dragons, elves, all that stuff, and it's usually in a period where there's no electricity.
And magic is usually
magic is
a core
usually
part of fantasy. Whereas with paranormal, you have the vampires and the shifters, the werewolves, those kinds of things. But magic is not a part of the sphere. So that's where the difference is. That's where that line is.
you might have
You
witches
add
here and there,
magic.
but not in a sense where it's prevalent in fantasy.
So magic is really kind of, I'm glad you
Secondary.
asked this question because I didn't know the answer either.
Yeah.
So magic is where you would draw that line then?
It's
Like
a
for
big
the
line.
layperson like me,
Yeah.
it would be,
Yeah.
okay.
Magic is the core element of fantasy. You can have witches in paranormal.
Right.
Because they have magic.
Mhm.
But fantasy, the core element in fantasy is the magic. If you don't have magic, it's not fantasy. It's just paranormal. But you don't have elves without the magic.
Right.
That's just, you just don't.
Yeah.
If they're an elf, if they're a fae, they're gonna have magic. So it's a fantasy.
Yeah, I was thinking, because I label mine as paranormal fantasy, and so part of the reason I do that is that the way where I kind of drew the line sounds like we're putting it in similar places. Is that in fantasy, magic is very much just woven into everyday life, and in paranormal, it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like there's you could describe the vampires and the werewolves and all that stuff as magic, but it's not woven into daily life. It's outside of that sphere. So yeah, it sounds like pretty much the same definition. Awesome. Now you said you're working with the horror authors organization.
Yeah, New England Horror Writers.
Okay. So you're probably dealing a lot with the market. Are you seeing any trends right now, like where horror is, getting more attention or less attention or anything like that? Like, are you already seeing any changes to the market with horror?
I am seeing changes to the market in that it is becoming more, I don't want to use mainstream because that's the wrong word and the wrong implication. I want to say that the general public is just becoming more aware that because there are so many different genres of horror, that there is something out there for everyone. And also there are people who, because of maybe recent trauma with the pandemic or whatever, they are starting to gravitate more toward things that are darker because now they have a framework to understand, where they didn't before. You had asked earlier how we stumbled onto horror. I don't really know why I stumbled onto horror. I just know that I did not have a really great childhood, and processing that is what kind of made me read dark things and go, oh my god, I get that. I understand that. That works. But something that was happy, I was like, okay, well, I can't relate to that. And so I think what's happening is in the market is that because there has been such an infusion of all of these subgenres now, there's a subgenre for everybody. There's like found footage, there's, whatever, like you were saying, there's, stuff, there's ghosts, there's whatever you want, and there's always more coming. It just seems to further subdivide itself. I think because as a nation and the world, we have all kind of been through our own internal struggles with this pandemic. People want darker stuff. Like 34 Orchard exploded. Like I wanted to do this little magazine, and I put it on the website. I said, oh, this will be awesome if 25 people read this. I'll be so happy. 50 of my friends, whatever. And it just exploded. Like I'm getting thousands of downloads, and I do a mix of real and horror. but people are writing to me going, I understand this, and these are not people that read horror before. So I think it's because of recent experiences, what's happening is people are starting to be like, I relate to that. And when you relate to something, especially in something you read, it's a weird form of comfort. Because you feel like, okay, that's terrible, but I'm not alone. And, you know, the biggest thing is fighting that feeling of isolation or feeling like you're misunderstood.
Like you said, childhood trauma, because and anytime I do a panel and they ask me, I always say childhood trauma, and then they laugh, and then they get the, oh, I'm sorry for laughing, but I'm like, it's fine. Like, if I was sensitive about it, I wouldn't be writing about it, but I wouldn't say either, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But, like, I had a really, really shitty childhood, and I think, even from an early age, you know, obviously before I wrote anything, I was reading Stephen King at like 8 years old.
Yeah,
Dean
me too.
Koontz, V.C. Andrews. Like my mom, I would go to the library and they wouldn't let me take the books out, but I would sit in the library and read them. Like Flowers in the Attic. You know what I mean? Like that's not for a 10-year-old. You know what I mean? And I used to read all of those, but that's where it came from. I never read like the kid books. Like I never read Goosebumps or anything like that. So a lot of the times too, when people like, so Mirror in the Attic was my first one that I wrote. And it's about a girl that gets kidnapped, but her family is a crappy family, and I always based the crappy parents off of my own parents. And it's funny because when people I know read it, they're like, "Oh my God, that's your dad." And I'm like, "Yeah." But it's also I had someone. So I'm 42 years old. Okay, I had someone who I was friends with in high school 20 years ago. She doesn't live near me. I haven't talked to her. She called me and she's like, "Is this about my parents? Because this is like exactly like my life was." And I think. And obviously, it's a horror book, and it's not like something that like I went through. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't kidnapped, whatever. But just like the secondary scenarios that show regular people interaction, a lot of people relate to that more than you think they will. I think a lot of people don't talk about that. They don't talk about parents fighting or like abuse and like stuff like that. But when they read it, they're like, "Yeah, I know what that is."
I understand that. Or like the best thing, when I get excited is when I read a short story or something and I'm like jumping up and down going, holy crap, oh my God, this person thinks like me, there's somebody out there. Like it's so exciting, you just feel so connected. And what's ironic is that I think now, I don't know if ironic's the right word to use, but we have the internet, right? So we're like all connected, okay? But it's so distancing. Whereas you can, in a way, whereas with a book or a reading experience, you can still have that feeling of intimacy between you and whoever wrote that. Whereas on the big world of the internet, even though you're connected, you're not making that emotional connection. There was some kind of study that was done and some paper that I read in some literary journal or something, I forget which, that was talking about how, it was really fascinating, how the monitor, like the internet monitor, actually serves as more like a window rather than like a door. I don't even remember where I read it. It was a couple of years ago, but it was cool. It was before the pandemic that I read it. I'll have to find it now. But he was saying that studies have shown that people are more apt to commune with their paper books rather, even though they go on social media and talk to other people, that their private time is spent with writing or reading something, even people that aren't huge readers. You know, it was really interesting. I'll have to find that study. I have no idea what happened to it. I had it somewhere, but I lost it.
I think too what's interesting now is there's more self-published and indie writers
Right.
that are good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I first tried to publish my first book, 5 years, and I don't know if anyone traditionally published or tried to go that route, but it kills you. Like
I'm querying right now, and
it is the worst thing ever. It's like, and then you get rejections, and some are just no. I've gotten a rejection once that was just like, yeah, no. I'm like, thanks for that. But, and so then I was like, maybe not this one. So then I wrote We All Fall Down, and it was right before the pandemic, and I was like, eesh, maybe I shouldn't because of what's happening. But I would get the same rejections when they would like give me a reason, and they would say that my characters were unrelatable. So in We All Fall Down, I have a single mother, I have an ex-con, and a drug dealer. They're the main characters. And I'm like, do you not know anyone that's a single, like, you know what I mean? But these are people that I knew growing up, And anyone that's read my books, they're like, oh yeah, my brother acts just like this guy. You know what I mean? So I think, too, a lot of traditionally published books are kind of out of touch because you have to go through a gatekeeper. What is popular right this second? And then is that going to be popular a year later when your book is published? But when you have these self-published books, it's more immediate, but also I think what's nice about that too is you can talk to these people. You know what I mean? You message Stephen King. Do you think you're going to get an answer? You can message me and I will answer you immediately. So
Exactly.
I put together an anthology, and it's got stories from people, authors all over the world, and some of them are big in the indie industry, and like you can talk to any of them.
Well, and that's the thing. Indie really has done a great service for horror. Because here's the other thing about indie, whether it's self-published or whether, like, my books are all through small houses.
Right.
The few that I have are actual small houses. But it's like, they take risks. There is stuff that you would never be able to talk about in a way, you know. You talk about, like, well, my mother died of cancer. It was awful to watch. Awful. I could write a book that talked about that and put it out there, and there'll be people going, thank God, I know exactly, oh my gosh, this was horrible. Whereas a mainstream, when you're dealing with big traditional publishing and an agent, here's the reality. They want a package. They're looking for the next Twilight. That is what they want. They want stuff that's going to appeal to the masses, that is going to be optioned for movies, that is going to make some product, right, like Star Wars. That's what it is. I have friends that are agents. They tell me that's what they're looking for. If you don't have that, just go do your thing.
Exactly. But then you have to hope too, when they take your book, that a year, 2 years from now when it's
Yeah,
out,
see?
that's still what's popular, and who's to say it will be?
Because it's forecasting too.
Yep.
I mean, they have to do a lot of forecasting. And that's why it's so difficult, I think. And that's why indie is awesome, because it has given voice to a lot of writers that wouldn't have had any exposure at all. And I read almost all indie now.
Mhm.
Just not because I know people, just because I start reading a book on Amazon and I go, oh my God, this is so good, I need to have it. You know, and also too, with the Kindle previews, I know Amazon is like the evil that we
Right,
all
yeah.
hate, but it's the necessary evil. It's so awesome that you can read that Kindle preview and make a decision before you purchase whether or not it's for you. And my dad was an English teacher, and he always used to say, I came home one day, I was really upset. I said, Dad, I can't read this book. And he goes, what is it? And I go, Pride and Prejudice. And he goes, oh yeah, I hate that book too. You know what? Go downstairs, read Daddy's Cliff Notes. You'll be fine, you'll pass the test. And I'm like, Dad, you're an English teacher. He goes, look, you've read Moby Dick, you love Crime and Punishment, you've read everything in my den. I'm not worried.
Right.
If you don't like Pride and Prejudice, it's okay. Don't bother. You're wasting your time. But you do need to understand all of its cultural stuff, because that's going to be important when you grow up. However, he also said, don't waste your time reading something because you think it's good for you. If you don't like it, that doesn't mean it's bad. That doesn't mean it's a terrible book. It just means you don't connect with it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Put it down and go find something you love. This is why so many people hate reading, because they feel like they're forced to do it. Like, it's okay. And I think in that service too, Amazon has done wonders for us, because as indies, people can read it and go, I've never heard of this person, but damn, this is so good. And they're discovering writers that, you know, basically only the big gatekeepers would say, okay, read this.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and now people can make more choices. I guess that was my
Look how
original
much more
point.
control we have. I can control what my cover looks like.
That's why
Yeah.
Tall Tales is done. Is Cindy, yeah.
I can like
It's
they're
the control.
they could very well be like, I don't like this character and get him out. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have control of everything, and when you're with a traditionally published whatever, you have no control over anything. I've read books and I've looked at the cover and I'm like, this does not look like, you know what I mean? Like, what is this? But like, yeah, it's more expensive because I pay for someone to do my covers, and you know, I pay for editing, and you pay for everything yourself. But I think it's worth it, because in the long run, you have control over everything. Like, I bought Vellum, so I can format my own books, and it was $250, but it's worth it. I can format other people's books now. and I do it for free because so I edit too, and I don't know if you've ever paid an editor, but they're really expensive. And I charge $1 per double space page because I think that it should be accessible to everybody and not just people that have money. And I think that's a big problem too. Obviously, anyone can put out garbage. Like in the indie self-publishing, you could have a first draft, put it out, cool, it's out there. But if you, I think to have like a good product, it can be inaccessible to a lot of people because editors, thousands of dollars, and I think that's ridiculous. Book covers, those can get pretty expensive too, and a lot of people can afford that. So I feel like for me, I would like to make it accessible as much as I can.
So we've talked a bit about appeal has come up, and so I want to kind of return to the paranormal romance authors because paranormal romance has become kind of its own kind of larger thing. As I mentioned, it's becoming a thing that people try to categorize other stuff into. And we've seen other sorts of kind of like monster-based romance, like with Shape of Water and things like that. What is it about kind of the paranormal or the monsters? What is it that you think is appealing to readers and to yourselves as writers right now?
It's mostly that, yeah, I have this guy over here. He's handsome. He's got a good job.
Thank you.
This guy, this guy, over here, this blood-sucking vampire, has even more money.
Will murder people for me.
If I really wanted to, yes. You know, that kind of thing. It's something that's, yeah, you can have the good side, but everybody likes the bad boy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we love our bad boys.
Exactly. And if the only way we can get to him is to fantasize about it, that's fine too.
Yeah. I have to agree.
It's everybody has this inner idea of I want danger, but I don't want to leave my couch. You know, it's just because these are dangerous creatures. They could bite you. Their friends could bite you. Anything, and it's just something that we don't want to be in the real world all the time. The real world frickin' sucks. You know? So, if it's something that we could escape to and enjoy and be happy and not that we aren't happy in most of our lives. Some of us are all happy and go lucky and all that, but
You need a break. It's
exactly.
like a mental break. Like I'm a substitute teacher for middle school.
Oh.
That's fun, right? And like you just want to be able to even just read something that's maybe it's complete trash, but like it takes your mind. It's like a soap opera. You know what I mean?
50 Shades.
So, okay, I just want to do one last question, kind of everybody, before we open up to the questions from the room. And we talked about how paranormal romance has kind of the danger aspect. Horror obviously has a fear aspect, kind of at the core of it. How do you approach incorporating that into your story, and what approach do you take to that? Because like I write cosmic horror mostly, and so it's not so much that it's scary circumstances as that it's circumstances that have this dread woven through them, and so I have to approach it in a very specific way. How do you kind of put that into your stories, and how do you go into that mindset to have that be there?
I look for what's scary for me. Like, and it might be different whenever I'm writing a book. You know what I mean? For different books. Like for Mirror in the Attic, she gets kidnapped, and she's in a small space. I hate small spaces. But like I'm a mother, and so We All Fall Down as a single mother with a kid, and as a parent, what's the scariest thing you can think of? Losing your kid, right? So there's parts in there where it's like, if this happened to me, I would die. So I kind of try to think of what's scary for me, and try to put that in there.
I don't ever think about it. Like, honestly, I don't try to do anything. I just kind of start and it comes out, and whatever my inner demons are, they're gonna talk for themselves. A lot of people have said to me that my work is sad, and or it's tragic, or it's horrifying because of its tragedy, and then they're like, how did you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I just sit down and do it, and whatever comes out comes out. And similarly, I've had people tell me that something I wrote is terrifying, and I'm like, that's awesome, because I wasn't scared when I wrote that, so I don't know. I just kind of, I really believe that writing, and I think we could all agree that writing comes from the inside out, right? So when we connect with something, we just sort of begin, and sometimes we do have to think of a plot. That's what's tough. Like, for me, it's like the plot and how this is all gonna shake out to get to my ending. But as far as like the things that sort of happen to that character, I just kind of let it roll and see where it goes. I try not to think about it. Unless I'm writing like for a specific call. Like I did Cosmic Horror recently. That's coming out. Dead Stars and Stone Arches is coming out in July, and I got in there and they wanted Cosmic Horror in the Old West. I've never written Western stuff in my life. But I was like, okay, well, I'll try it. And I just kind of went down this rabbit hole. I'm really terrified of dinosaurs, and I'm really terrified of like that whole history. There's a portion of history in Utah where there was a lot of massacres because of the Mormons and all that. And those things, those two things, I just kind of slammed them together and said, okay, like she said, this is what scares me. And I just got this story out of it, and people who've read it are like, this thing is terrifying. I'm like, well, you know, I am afraid of raptors and other things that don't exist. So I guess, you know, But yeah, so I think it just comes out.
The best part about being a pantser is you don't have to think about that.
Yes, amen.
Yeah, but you do have to think about that, because when you go back and edit, it's kind of
Well, yeah, but I don't plot, I don't plan, I don't do any outline.
I don't either.
No, I can't. I am incapable. But if I have a story, it's gonna go from beginning to end. I can't write any other way. I also cannot write on a computer. I have to do it longhand.
And then type it in after?
Yes.
That's kind of good though too, because then you can like sort of go through it and like you know, kind of if you need to fix things, you can kind of fix them.
Exactly, because then I have that's my first edit.
Right.
Is typing it in.
So, do you have any thoughts about conveying the danger before we go to the room questions?
No.
Okay, well, I'll hand it over to you then.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody have questions for any of us?
It's kind of a two-parter, but rooted in the same cause. Is when you rise. I mean, as when I'm writing too, one of my bigger concerns is I want to scare my audience. I don't want them to just, you know, enjoy the book and put it down, and, you know, 5-10 minutes later or however long later they just know it exists, or it just becomes a piece on their shelf. I want something in my book to scare them, something to stick. But also, again, it's both of them rooted in the same spot. But the second part is the marketing end of it. It also affects the scares of the book, or any kind of artwork, maybe movies or book. But oversaturation of horror nowadays, over familiarity with it today, with social media, or just, you know, running roughshod over everyone's life. Everybody's attention span is shrinking by the day. And as we know, when you read a book, you gotta be there. It's nothing that you know, you click, it's done. You don't download it like a computer. You have to read the whole thing, even if it's electrical. So, because back then, before the internet was even a thing, before it existed, you only had horror trickle in by X amount of resources. You always had your indie market, but you always had the mainstream people. You had Stephen King, Dean Koontz, etc., doing this on literary ends. Then you had your Wes Cravens doing this on your visual ends. But they only came from a select few resources that everybody knew, and everybody got scared from all this stuff. It always left its mark because it had time to settle. It had time to marinate, and it found its peace in everyone. Like, everybody somewhere along the line is afraid of clowns because of it. Everybody's afraid to go to sleep, or at least was at some point or another, because of Nightmare on Elm Street. But today, because we get hit by horror from every angle, and everything can be caught in an instant, and like I said, attention spans are shrinking by the day. Do you find that affects the effect of your work in an audience?
I don't think so, because I think your audience is looking for it.
Right.
I especially with self-published, you kind of have to look for us. So you're looking for something that I'm writing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not like I'm gonna go to Stop and Shop and I'm going grocery shopping and I'm just gonna look at the book. You're looking for what I'm writing. So I don't think it affects it, and I don't think, I know everyone says oversaturation is horrible, but I don't think it's a bad thing, because I think everyone deserves to have a chance, but because there's so much stuff out there, you can find something that you like. And with social media, like for me, Twitter has been the most helpful thing ever. There's a humongous writing community.
Yeah.
And there's people that I've talked to that are traditionally published that I never would have thought, like Mike Carey. You know who that is, right? The girl with all the gifts. It's a movie too on Netflix. It's a vampire. Nicest guy he'll talk to you. Richard Codry does the Sandman Slim. They will all talk to you. And I think it's helpful and it's encouraging, because even though they're bigger guys, they're traditionally published, Rio Yours, like all these, they'll talk to you. And to say like, I don't want to put this out, or I'm afraid to put this out because I think there's too many vampire books, or there's too many, or whatever it is that you're writing, I wouldn't even worry about it, because anyone that's looking for you and looking for you, that's what they're looking for. And when you're in that indie community, they all support each other. Like, I've read books about Bigfoot. Holly Ray Garcia writes a book, it's like the Easton Falls Massacre, Bigfoots that go crazy. Do you know what I mean? I'm looking for that book. She just wrote a book called Parachute, where it takes you back in time. That's what I'm looking for. You know what I mean? And I think especially when we're self-publishing, we write the weird stuff.
Yeah, you're not getting the same stuff over and over, and also, like she said, and just like my dad said years ago, there's millions of books out there. You're gonna find something that is just for you. Like, I know that my readership is very small right now, but my readership is damn, they're like, oh no, I want what she has, because I kind of built my own brand. They're my own brand. They're looking for me. So I don't worry about it. Like, I'm like, whatever, they'll find me.
I think when you start worrying about it and you start tailoring your writing to what you think people want, that's when your writing becomes not genuine and people are not going to read it because it's forced.
And readers sense that. They know when you're
they'll
not
know.
being real.
Personally, because I write cosmic horror, I find that I don't have that problem because of the nature of the genre.
Yeah.
Where in order to do cosmic horror, you rely heavily on connecting people with characters, and so they want to keep reading because they're interested in the characters. And you have this, like I said, it kind of has this dread woven through it that you want to see resolved. And so I think when you're approaching things like that, it's easier to keep people's attention, even if they do have shorter attention spans, which I'm not entirely convinced is actually true. But even if that is true, it's easier to keep people for longer because they're invested in the characters and they're invested in kind of this atmosphere. And ultimately, I think every genre comes down to that, is there something for a reader to invest in? And if there is, then they will.
The best piece of advice I heard was from George Lucas back when he first made Star Wars, when he was making it. I guess he was getting studio advice here and there, and he just rejected everything that didn't line up with what he wanted to do. And this piece that always sticks with me, and I apply it to everything that I do, is that, make what you want to make, write what you want to write. And if it's what you want to do, your passion will reflect on that, and it will be that much more impactful. So that's what I always just like to stick with that. I think one of you said that before, something about that.
I have one writing based. I was curious what techniques you use or employ to help cultivate suspense in your writing.
Ooh, there's a lot. Overall structure, I think it's really important with suspense to start with your atmosphere. That's going to be a lot. I think these guys would agree with me. You can't, yes, I read a terrifying ghost story that was set in the middle of the day in a Key West swimming pool. It was terrifying because the writer used single effect, which is Poe's theory that everything kind of works towards, creating your thing. The word choices she made were dread-inducing, all of that. So start with your atmosphere, start with your word choices. The second thing I would do too is make sure that you're building on the scene that comes before. One thing that's really useful is to try to figure out your thud. I don't know what it's called technically. You know how you put a thud on the end of a section where it's like it kind of leaves the reader stop. That is really important to nail that, because then I guess some writers call it a hook to go forward. I've always called it a thud.
And one that I use a lot is foreshadowing. I'm a plotter. I'm not a pantser. I have all 5 books of Tall Tales plotted out. I'm currently writing book 3. And so one of the things that I can do, because I have all that laid out in front of me, is I can drop hints here that aren't going to pay off for 2 books. You know what I mean? And you kind of pick up, as you're reading, you kind of pick up that these things are connected and these things are pointing to something. But that builds tension because, like, you know that something is building here. You know that this is going somewhere, but you don't know where yet. And you see, like, parts of it coming together. And you know that, oh, okay, it's starting to take shape. I know that this thing is coming. I know that this thing is going to have roughly this shape. What in the world is going to happen when it actually happens? And so that is one of the tools that I use throughout Tall Tales, is kind of that bit of foreshadowing and the ways that I have partial fulfillment of them.
I think it depends on what you're going for. So in Mirror in the Attic, the first chapter is a murder. Someone's getting killed, but then it goes on to something completely different. So you're left like, what the hell just happened? But in the other book that I wrote, We All Fall Down, it's kind of like a slow burn, and it's leading up to it. So I think you need to determine, do you want that giant impact in the beginning, or do you want to, let it go? So with Mirror in the Attic, I definitely think that one is more of like an action-based, but the other one's more character-based. And I think that's important, that you need to decide, is your book, or whatever you're writing, is it going to be action-based, or is it going to be character-based? Because they're not the same thing. So,
yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and if you need to build up those characters, and your book is more about the characters than it is about, what's going on, then it's better to, like, lead up to it. But if your book is, like, action-packed, have an action scene in the front, and then have something completely unrelated happen, so that people are like, what the hell did I just read? And then you have to keep reading, because you want to know what the hell just happened.
About the first line, because that just hit me. I don't remember where I heard it, but somehow I stick with it. It's never start your book with the word "the." I don't know if that is as a thought that crosses anyone's mind, or if anyone does it and sees it written and it doesn't bother them. I don't know where I heard it, but for some reason it stuck with me. And then the more I think about it, the more I read books. I don't really see it too often, but when I do, it kind of always like you said, started off immediately with the unknown.
Well,
The feels almost like a drawn in the sand start line.
So kind of my general approach to writing advice is that all writing advice would work better if you added "without reason" at the end of it. So, don't include adverbs without reason. Don't do this without reason. If you rephrase them that way, what they serve to do is stop and look at what you're doing and ask, is this actually beneficial to the story? And so none of the rules are concrete. People, when we say them as truisms, they sound concrete, but they're not. They're just telling you, this is a thing that you need to stop and analyze while you're doing it. And so, really any writing advice that you can get, that would be how I say, make sure you handle it that way.
yeah, that's awesome. I'd never heard that before. That's great. I love that, without reason. And also too, yeah, I think rules are bendable. What I find with openings, just for me, I don't know if it goes for you guys, because I do a lot of short stories, a lot of times your opening line is actually sort of buried somewhere in the second or third paragraph. Usually, that's where the money line is. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes I get that money line right away. But I would always say, if you're going to start writing, just start. Don't try for that perfect opening line out of the gate. Just do it, because I'm telling you, and because I edit for my magazine too, there's times where I will write to the writer and say, okay, look, your money line for this opener is at the bottom of your second paragraph. This is how the story should open.
I'm Tim McLaughlin. TallTalesUF.com is where my stories are, and you can find contact information and social media and everything there.
Angel Nix, you can find me on Facebook as author Angel Nix.
Christy Peterson Schoonover, you can just Google me at ChristyPetersonSchoonover.com, and there's only one of me, so even if you misspell it, you'll find me.
Jen Berandini. I'm on Twitter, same name, and my website is jenberandini/author.
Connie Hunter, ConnieHunterAuthor.com. I'm on Twitter at ConnieHunter31.
Facebook is the easiest.
And
You were behind me.
Facebook,
Just before
Connie
that.
Hunter,
You passed
even
me and then turned and then
TikTok.
got me.
Connie Hunter.